Hey, Stephen. Hang on one sec. That new camera, all right, are we ready to proceed? Okay, Tina.
Jurors in the courtroom, Your Honor.
Thank you, Deputy. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Were you all able to abide by my instructions during the recess? All righty. Mr. Escobar, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Mr. Proctor, you're still under oath.
Thank you, ma'am.
Detective, I'll keep calling you detective, I'm sorry. Mr. Proctor.
That's fine, sir.
Before going back into that theater, or before going into the theater for the first time, anybody give you the name of Joanna Turner?
Not by name, sir.
Well, what did they give you if they didn't give it to you by name?
After the meeting, or after the, I went into the theater, there was a meeting of,
We're not there yet. I'm saying
Okay.
before you went into the theater.
yes, sir.
At 5:32 in the afternoon.
Yes, sir.
Did the name Joanna Turner, was that given to you?
No, sir.
Despite the fact that you had the meeting with supposedly all of the brass and discussing all of the interviews and all of the voluntary forms and all of that. Right?
Yes, sir.
And certainly nobody gave you a voluntary form there at that meeting with the brass that had the name Joanna Turner for you to read.
No, sir.
In fact, you didn't read a single voluntary statement that had been given by any witness prior to going into the theater at 5:32.
The Hamiltons.
Well, that was because you interviewed them, right?
Right.
No, I'm talking about from the brass at the meeting.
No, sir, I didn't read any written statements then.
Okay. So now you go into the theater, and even though it was 2013, we are at an age where surveillance cameras are pretty common, right?
Yes, sir.
It didn't have to be 2022 for that to happen, right?
That's correct, sir.
In 2013, surveillance cameras were pretty popular.
Wasn't it 2014, Mr.
Excuse me,
Escobar?
2014.
Yes, sir.
Am I correct?
They were popular, yes, sir.
They'd been popular for quite some time.
Sir?
They'd been popular for quite some time.
Yes, sir.
And so when you went into that theater, you immediately realized that there were cameras in that theater, correct?
Yes, sir.
And so as you walked into the general theater, you looked up, there was one to your right, and there was another one to your left, right?
And Theater 10?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And so when you looked up and saw those cameras, you realized with all the years of law enforcement experience that you had, that video surveillance is important, right?
Yes, sir.
And when you see cameras, you're going to go and watch that film as quickly as you can.
Yes, sir.
Because you don't want that film to be destroyed, right?
That's correct.
And that film can have incredible opportunities in your investigation, correct?
Yes, sir.
And so you didn't do that. You didn't go to management at the cop theater and say, Mr. Manager, I'd like to be able to see whatever is on that film. You didn't do that.
No, sir, I did not.
And you would agree with me that you later found out that you didn't even have to go to the IT room upstairs in order to view that video, correct? You could have done it from the manager's desk.
I wasn't aware of that, sir.
You weren't.
No, sir.
It's because you never asked anybody, right?
No, sir, I'm not computer savvy. I'm definitely not video savvy. We had those people with the sheriff's office there.
Cybercrime.
Thank you, sir. We had cyber crimes there to obtain all of that.
So if you're not computer savvy, and you've got the battalion of cybercrime there, you had Oulson, correct?
Yes, sir.
You had Lindsay, correct?
Yes, sir.
You had Pepinella, correct?
Yes, sir. I'm not for sure who all was there the day of.
Those guys are really good, aren't they?
They are.
They're highly trained, correct?
They are.
They're highly trained to preserve evidence, correct?
They are.
In fact, that's why they were there. Correct?
To obtain the video, yes, sir.
Well, not only to obtain it correctly,
That's correct.
and to make sure that nobody, even the cop theater, could destroy it, correct?
That would be correct, sir.
Because when you're doing an investigation, you can't trust anybody else. You've got to put that trust only in the people that are employed by the Pasco Sheriff's Office, correct?
We'd like to have it that way, yes, sir.
And that's why they were there.
Yes, sir.
And so did you go over to Detective Oulson and say, Detective Oulson, I see that we've got some video here. I need you to go and I need you to preserve that evidence, period.
They told me that it was being preserved.
That's not my question.
Yes, sir.
Did you go to Detective Oulson, who is an expert in cybercrime, and say, Detective Oulson, you're here for this purpose. I want you to go and preserve that video evidence?
No, sir, I did not tell him that.
Well, why not?
He knows his job. That's what he does.
Well, unless Detective Smith tells him, I don't want you to do it, I'm going to handle it myself. Right?
Judge, I'm going to object. Calls for speculation on the part of this witness.
Sustained.
You would agree that Detective Smith was the crime scene detective, right?
Yes, sir.
And he had to make sure, like you, that things were going to be properly preserved because he is the crime scene detective.
That's correct, sir.
And in 2013,
14.
but in 2013, the year before, when he was in missing persons, you didn't know anything about Detective Smith as far as his capabilities in cybercrime. He wasn't in cybercrime, right?
I knew that he knew how to obtain video. He had assisted me before in robberies where he had obtained the video for me in other cases.
So he had obtained the video. Do you know what type of background he had in order to be able to do that?
No, sir. I knew that I didn't know all of his training, but I knew that he was very capable of obtaining the video.
But you would agree that obtaining the video doesn't mean that you tell the cop theater, hey, listen, do whatever you all want to do with the video and then give me a copy later on. That's not what you expected.
And I don't think that's what occurred.
My question is, that's not what you expected, right?
No, sir.
Okay, so you pretty much didn't have even a conversation with Smith about the video because you assumed that he was going to do something.
I remember the conversation occurring that the cop theater was not able to produce the video the day of the incident.
Oh, wait a minute. The cop theater was not able to produce the video, but you had cybercrime there that could extract the hard drives in the proper way and preserve the video, right? You agree with that?
There again, sir, that's above my, my knowledge. I don't,
Well, you could have spoken to Bousson and say, hey, Bousson, I guess someone in the cop theater is saying that they're not gonna turn over the videos. What can we do here? Did you have that conversation with Bousson?
I did not.
You knew at that moment that the cop theater had a liability interest of their own, right?
That would be a possibility, yes, sir.
And you certainly didn't want the cop theater to be doing anything with that video, did you?
No, sir, I did not.
Did you know that at the very moment that you had walked in to that theater tent, that the cop theater was remotely looking at the video? Did you know that?
No, sir, I did not.
So the cop theater can look at the video remotely, you're there, you can't look at the video.
It was my understanding, sir, that we could not view the video that day.
Well, was it your understanding that Detective Smith told Bousson, hey, get out of here, I'm handling this?
Judge, I'm gonna object. It calls for speculation.
No, there's no speculation about that.
Sustained, there is.
Judge Bousson is going to be testifying for me.
Okay.
Okay, so what else do you do in that crime scene, other than talk to Detective Smith for a few minutes and leave?
I also, Detective Smith gave me a rundown as to where the evidence that they had collected, the evidence they were in the process of collecting, where the victim and his wife and the suspect and his wife were sitting.
Okay, did he give you the measurements?
No, sir.
Did he give you the measurements of the seats?
No, sir.
You knew that the seats had arms, correct?
Sir?
You knew the seats had arms, right?
Yes, sir.
And did those arms move up and down?
I'm not aware, sir.
And so you left the cop theater without obtaining that video, those hard drives, that day, right?
That's correct, sir.
And in fact, you had posted, had you not, officers there at the cop theater to not allow anybody to come in to the cop theater, right?
Theater 10, yes, sir.
And you became aware that the cop theater sent an IT person from Mulberry to seize the actual hard drives that very night, correct?
I wasn't aware of that, sir.
You're not aware of that today?
I wasn't aware of that.
This is the first time you heard of it.
I was not.
Counsel's testifying, facts not in evidence.
I'm not testifying, I'm asking if this is the first time he's heard that.
I know, but where's the facts coming from you?
Oh, it's Mr. Sillis.
I'm gonna overrule.
The first time that you have heard that a Mr. Sillis, an IT person from Mulberry, came over that night, penetrated security there at the cop theater and seized the videos is today?
That's correct, sir.
So I guess Detective Smith never shared that with you.
I wasn't aware of it, sir. He could have, but I don't remember that conversation occurring.
Well, if that had occurred, you'd be disappointed.
I wasn't aware of it, sir.
Were you disappointed now that you heard that today?
I'm disappointed that I didn't know it before I'm sitting here in front of a jury.
Well, are you disappointed that someone seized multitude of hard drives right under your nose?
I'm disappointed that I didn't know that.
Now, Detective,
Yes, sir.
you didn't know that the hard drives from the cop theater, especially all the hard drives dealing with Theater 10 and lobby and what have you, you didn't know that those hard drives had been seized and flown to Alabama?
No, sir.
Well, You didn't go to Alabama to go and retrieve those hard drives?
I did.
Well, where did you think those hard drives had come from? Thin air?
No, sir.
I would rephrase, Your Honor. Where
Thank
did you
you.
think those hard drives came from?
I was not aware that the hard drives were in Wesley Chapel.
You
Until-
didn't believe that the hard drives that you were getting from Alabama were the ones that were taken from the Wesley Chapel Cobb Theater?
Yes, sir. I thought the ones from Alabama are the ones from Wesley Chapel. I understand that now, but at the time, I thought that the hard drives were being remotely, that the feed was remotely to that location.
So are you telling me that when you went to Alabama, you thought that the hard drives that you were picking up were not the actual hard drives? You thought that there were some kind of copies that were done for you at the pleasure of the Cobb Theater?
No, sir. That's what I'm saying. I'm not video savvy. I don't understand all that working. And I did not realize that the hard drives, I didn't realize that they were even in Wesley Chapel.
You didn't realize that the hard drives were in Wesley Chapel because you never went into the IT room to take a look at the surveillance equipment, correct?
That's correct.
You didn't know the make and model of the system, correct?
No, sir, but I had people there that did.
You didn't know the make and model of each hard drive?
No, sir.
You didn't know which hard drive belonged to which camera, correct?
That's correct.
You didn't know if you had multiple hard drives that were supplied by any particular camera?
That's correct.
You didn't know anything about that system.
Absolutely correct.
And so, at some point in time, much days later, right? You and Smith decide, I think we better go to Alabama.
Your Honor, will we briefly approach?
Yes.
Back to those hard drives.
Yes, sir.
You went all the way to Alabama days later, right?
That's correct.
And you went with Detective Smith
That's correct.
to go and retrieve those particular hard drives that had been in the Cobb Theater on the very moment of this incident.
That's correct, sir.
And you didn't go to just Cobb Theater management. You had to go to a lawyer's office for the Cobb Theater to go and retrieve those hard drives.
That's correct, sir.
And when you got the box or the luggage that the hard drives were in, it had a lock on it, right?
That's correct.
And so there at the lawyer's office, you didn't say, hey, lawyer, open this box so that we can see what's in it and we can inventory it and we can take photos before I am taking it back. Right? You didn't do any of that.
No, sir.
You left the box locked, not knowing what was in the box.
That's correct, sir.
And certainly you had done nothing prior to going to Alabama to go and check and see what system they had there at the Cobb Theater so that you could correlate as to whether, okay, this hard drive goes here, and this hard drive goes here, and this. You didn't do any of that.
No, sir.
And so now you're getting this box with, you don't even know how many hard drives were in there, right?
I don't, sir.
And so you get this box that was locked, and you take it with you, and you got to come all. Did you fly or you drove?
We drove.
You drove. You drove all the way back to Pasco County, and certainly when you got to Pasco County and you got to the evidence room, certainly you opened that box and said, okay, let's inventory it before it goes into evidence.
I did not.
Well, that's the proper protocol, right?
No, sir.
Oh, it's not. So you can just get a box that has nothing that you know of. I mean, it could have had 3 kilos of cocaine, and you would have known it, right?
I'm sorry, do that
Chairman,
again?
object. Is that a
That
question
box-
or a statement?
That box
Sustained.
could have had anything in it, and you would have never known it.
I was told that the box contained,
Well, I
The hard
realize
drives.
you were told that
Yes,
by
sir.
some lawyer that was representing the interests of Cop Theater, right?
yes, sir.
But my question is that you did not know before you entered that box into evidence what was in that box. For all you know, it could have been anything. Right?
Yes, sir, I was told that it was the hard drives.
Okay. And so now you put that in evidence, right?
Yes, sir.
And the person that you call on in order to image, to copy those hard drives, is the person that was at the Cop Theater the night of January the 13th of 2014, Mr. Oulson, right?
I don't know who copies those, sir.
Well, do you know that he was the one that copied those for you?
He's part of that team.
So it stayed in evidence, tell me, stayed in evidence for a week without knowing what was in there?
Sir, I don't know.
How about a month?
I don't know, sir.
How about 3 months?
Let the witness answer, please.
My apologies.
Sir, I'm not aware how long the box remained in evidence. Cyber crimes, the state attorney's office, they were handling all of that aspect of it. We had CDs of the incident, the shooting, and I don't know how long the box remained in property and evidence.
And those CDs that you had were given to you days after the incident
A couple days later, that's correct.
from somebody there with Cobb Theater, right?
Detective Smith obtained those.
Okay, do you know how? Do you know if he got it from a competent source, like a IT person, a computer engineer, a cybercrime expert?
I don't know who he obtained those from.
You don't? Okay. And so then at some point in time, though that box, were you responsible for also taking that box out and taking it to some gentleman in Orlando?
No, sir.
That wasn't you, that was Detective Smith?
Yes, sir. I went to Alabama to get it, and I brought it back with Detective Smith. We put it into evidence, and that was it. I simply accompanied him there for the long drive.
Detective, you would agree that you were not happy having to go to Alabama to get a vital piece of evidence that should have been preserved right here in Pasco County, right?
Do that again, sir? I'm sorry.
Yes, I'll tell you again. You were not happy over the fact that you had to go to Alabama to pick up a vital piece of evidence in this case when it should have been done right here by your cybercrime unit in Pasco County.
There again, sir, I'm not aware of how cyber crimes, how to obtain that. We were, that's the way it occurred. I didn't know that the DVRs were even in Wesley Chapel. There again, cyber crimes is the one that handles that. My happiness, I wanted to obtain the video.
Let me ask you this question.
My happiness has no bearing on the trip to Alabama.
Well, let me ask you a question. You certainly interviewed John Sillis, who was the IT person that came in the middle of the night and took the hard drive. You did that, right?
I did not.
Or did you direct someone to do that? Did you direct some of your detectives, hey, this John Sillis, we need to talk to him? Did you direct anybody to do that?
Sir, as I've testified to earlier, I did not know that the video had been removed, the hard drives.
I have no further questions.
Thank you. Redirect?
May I have a moment, please,
You
Judge?
may. Is that your pen, Mr. Escobar?
Oh, thank you, Your Honor. These are hard to, they don't have much ink in them.
Oh, right. It's a new wave pens.
I know. Thank you, Detective.
Yes, sir.
And Your Honor, my exhibit.
May it please the court, counsel. Mr. Proctor, do you have a copy of Alan Hamilton's statement?
I do not, sir.
Okay.
Counsel does.
I-
I've got it. Sure. Defense exhibit, I think, number 20. Well, it's in the back. Defense exhibit number 20. Excuse me. Yeah, number 21.
For the record, it's defense exhibit number 21. May I approach the witness?
You may.
Detective Proctor, I'm going to ask that you look at that statement, not only look at it, but I'm going to ask you to read it to yourself and see if anywhere in that written statement, Mr. Hamilton stated that it was dark in the theater, and the second thing I'm going to ask you to do is see if he ever uses the word silhouette in his written statement.
If I may.
That's what.
I'm sorry, sir, but there's no mention of silhouette here?
Is there any mention of dark?
No, sir.
Mr. Garcia, I think I need to clarify for the record, obviously that has not been admitted yet.
Yes, ma'am. Now, Mr. Proctor, let's talk about notes. I think you indicated on cross-examination, based on questions from Mr. Escobar, that you take notes when you interviewed Mr. Hamilton and Mrs. Hamilton. Right.
That's correct, sir. And
once you have memorialized your police report, you destroy those
Your
notes.
Honor, I'm going to object.
I do.
Sustained. That was.
Right. You took notes, right?
Yes, sir.
Did you write a police report in this case
Yes, sir, I did.
in reference to your interview with Mr. Hamilton and Mrs. Hamilton?
That's correct.
Did you document in that report what they had told you?
Yes, sir, I did.
did your notes comport with the report?
Yes, sir, they did.
After the report was written, did you then destroy the notes?
Yes, sir, I did.
Was there anything different in the notes as compared to the report?
No, sir, there was.
All right. Now, on cross-examination, Mr. Escobar went to great lengths asking you, well, did you ask Mr. Reeves about his disabilities? Did you go into this? Did you go into that? Do you remember that?
Yes, sir, I did.
On the second interview, did you ask Mr. Reeves, is there anything else you want to tell me?
Yes, sir, I did.
Okay. Now, let's talk about on cross-examination. Mr. Escobar asked you, Mr. Proctor, did you go into the theater and did you ask him to put the manager to put the lights on and the previews on and so on and so forth, right?
Yes, sir.
Now, as you're sitting here today, Mr. Proctor, is there any way that you could have gone back in time and done everything in that theater exactly the way it occurred on January 13, 2014? And by that, I mean, have the defendant sitting in the same seat, his wife there, obviously all the other witnesses that were in that theater, right?
Yes, sir.
With the previews playing at the volume with the correct lighting at that time.
That's
No.
also speculation as to whether he could have done it or not. I mean, we'd have to bring the witnesses in.
Judge?
Oliver.
Right?
There's no way you can recreate it.
Okay. Mr. Escobar went into great lengths about you going in there and you sitting and seeing this, right?
Yes, sir.
Does it matter what you saw or you heard?
And
If it's you,
yes, sir.
it doesn't matter, right?
No.
Judge, I'm going to object. Move to strike. Leading.
Sustained.
Move to strike.
Rephrase.
Mr. Proctor, what's important is what the defendant saw through his own eyes.
That's correct.
What he saw, what he heard, not you.
That's correct, sir.
You have a moment, Judge?
You may.
Because I don't have any further questions of
Can we
Mr.
approach
Proctor.
real quickly?
Yes. Released. You're probably going to be on standby. Standby. All right, Mr. Proctor, you're free to go, but if you do get called back, you have to. Okay. If you do get called back, you have to come back.
Yes, ma'am.
But-
I'm out of this area. Can you give me a day's notice?
We will, Your Honor.
All right,
Thank you.
you'll get a day's notice.
Thank you, Your Honor. It's good seeing you.
You too.
Yes. It's been a while. Thank you.
State?
State would call Mark Turner.
solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you shall give in this call to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Rosenhausen.
Thank you. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Can you please state your name and spell your first and last name for the court reporter?
Mark Turner, Markturner.
And you don't have to tell us exactly where you live, but what city do you currently live in?
Brandon,
All right. And back January 13th of 2014, what city were you living in?
Wesley Chapel.
All right. Are you currently employed?
I'm retired.
All right. What did you do before you were retired?
26 years in the Air Force and 10 years in the aviation industry.
Okay, and just very, very briefly, we don't need an entire history, but very briefly, what did you do in the Air Force?
I began as an enlisted man and then went to officer training school, aviation school, and spent most of my time in the intelligence arena.
Back on January 13th of 2014, did you go to the Cobb Theater to see the movie Lone Survivor?
I did.
And who'd you go there with?
My wife.
All right. Is there a particular part of the theater that you sit in when you go to the movie theater?
I usually try to find an aisle seat up high.
And were you able to do it on that particular day?
Yes, sir.
When you went into the Cobb Theater, so you walk up a ramp to get in there, is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
All right, then you have to turn around to your left or right, depending on what side of the theater you're on. And
Yes.
you look back at the seats, correct?
Yes, sir.
All right, when you walked in, do you recall whether or not the previews were playing at that time?
They were.
Do you recall what the lighting conditions were like?
Dimmed, but you could see your way through pretty clearly.
All right, and we're obviously going to be talking about a shooting. The lighting conditions that you're going to describe now, were they the same lighting conditions at the time of the shooting?
Yes.
All right, so let's tell the members of the jury about that. Was it dark like when the actual movie is playing?
No,
All right, so there's lights on at this point.
that's correct.
All right, not the full house lights, but I guess as you indicated, dimmed.
Yes.
All right, so when you're looking at the entire theater, can you see the rows?
Yes.
Can you clearly see them?
Yes.
Can you see people sitting in the rows?
Yes.
How about the aisles? Clear enough to see the aisles?
Yes.
Clear enough to see the steps?
Yes.
Did you have any concern for your safety? And I don't mean like in a super dangerous way, but, you know, walking up to go find seats?
No.
All right, did you need like a flashlight from your phone or anything like that?
No, sir.
Could you see 5, 10 seats away from you?
You could.
All right, so you make your way up to where? Is it the back row?
Back row, I sat in the first seat on the aisle. My wife sat inward.
Okay, so if the screen's behind me and you're facing the theater, were you on the left side of the theater or the right side of the theater?
On the right side.
Okay, well, that'd be facing the screen, you're on the right side.
That's correct.
All right, so if you're sitting, you're all the way to the right of the theater in the back row.
That's correct.
All right. Now, when you sat down, you indicated the lighting conditions were the same as you described it.
Yes.
All right, you recall what the volume was like?
It was elevated, but you could still converse.
Okay, and when you say elevated, that's coming from whatever's coming from the movie theater screen.
Right.
All right, and did you have any difficulty hearing your wife, the person you came with?
Not at all.
Did you have any difficulty hearing anyone else around you at that point?
Not so much. No.
All right, could you hear, the chattering in the movie theater?
Yes.
Right. Could you specifically hear what people were saying, or maybe the better way is, were you listening to other people's conversations?
No.
All right, so you couldn't hear the conversation because you weren't paying attention to it,
Correct.
but you could hear that people were talking?
Yes. I'm going to object. It's about 10
Last-
leading questions.
I understand.
Last two. Sustained.
Based on the level of the volume in the theater, did you have any difficulty hearing anyone else?
No.
All right, we're going to be talking about the shooting incident. First of all, did you know any of the people involved in the shooting?
I did not.
Did you later learn the name of the person that did the shooting?
Yes.
And what was that person's name?
Curtis Reeves.
All right. Did you later learn the name of the person that was shot?
I did.
And what was his name?
Chad Oulson.
All right. And we're just doing that just so it's easier to describe to the members of the jury who everyone is. When you first sat down in the theater, was the defendant Curtis Reeves there?
He was not.
Right. Did you see him at some point in time?
I caught him just as he was approaching my aisle, coming back from wherever he had been.
All right. Did you have an opportunity to watch him come up?
Briefly, yes.
All right. Is there anything about what you saw of him that led you to believe that he has difficulty walking?
Not that I noticed.
Okay. He didn't have a cane or a wheelchair or anything like
No,
that? Did he go by you?
he did.
All right. And did you watch him as he went down the row?
Only in the sense that I turned in that direction to move my knees out of the way so that he could get by. And of course, he was in my field of vision. I saw him go back to his seat.
Okay. Did you see him lean forward or do anything like that when he got to his seat?
Not really. I saw him take his seat. I didn't pay much attention at that time. I was just really kind of scanning the room.
Okay. And based on the lighting conditions, did you have any difficulty seeing him?
No.
All right. At some point in time after he returned to his seat, did you see any contact between him and Chad Oulson?
I did.
Okay. And what did you see at this point?
Just Mr. Reeves leaned forward. There was apparently an exchange.
Okay. And when you say exchange, could you hear exactly what was being said at that point in time during that exchange?
I could not.
Okay. You just know there was an exchange.
Right.
Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
At this point, did you notice whether or not Chad Oulson was standing or sitting?
He was standing.
While Chad Oulson was standing, did you hear him say anything?
I did, yes.
And what did you hear him say?
He said, do you mind? I got a message or a text from my babysitter. I'm checking on my daughter.
Could you hear the defendant say anything in response to that?
I could not.
After that response from Chad Oulson, what was the next thing you saw happen?
Well, something, I guess something was said. I saw a reaction from Chad Oulson where he reached across and grabbed popcorn from Mr. Reeves and flipped it back in his face.
Okay. And when you saw that happening, do you know where, let me ask you this, do you know if anyone was with Chad Oulson at the time?
His wife, he was with his wife.
Okay. When Mr. Oulson reached over and grabbed the popcorn,
Yes.
did you see what his wife was doing?
I did not, before the incident, all that I had seen was her hand go up to his chest as if to coax him to sit down.
Okay. And do you recall if she was standing, sitting?
My recollection is that she was sitting.
And do you know how it was that she positioned her hand? Do you recall which way it was facing?
It was her left hand and on his left side of his chest.
Okay. And do you recall, let's say that if she was wearing a wedding ring, was the wedding ring facing Mr. Oulson or facing Mr. Reeves?
It would have been Mr. Reeves.
Okay. So her hand, I'm just using myself as a demonstrative aid, would be just this way facing?
Yes.
Okay. Now prior, well, let me skip ahead just for a moment. After you saw Mr. Oulson, you said, how did he throw the popcorn?
He reached across, grabbed the popcorn, and just kind of brought it back and then flipped it, kind of with the flip of the wrist back into the face of Mr. Reeves.
What happened right after that?
Well, I saw Mr. Reeves' arm come up from his side, extend. I saw a muzzle flash and heard the gunshot, and Mr. Oulson was shot.
Was that fairly quickly after the popcorn toss?
Very, very quickly.
At any point in time, in this entire time that you're watching, do you ever see Mr. Oulson climbing over his row into the defendant's row?
No, sir.
Okay. And are you sitting in the defendant's row?
I'm in the defendant's row, that's correct.
Okay. And where is Mr. Oulson in relation to the defendant?
One row below.
Okay. And at any time did you see Mr. Oulson climbing into the defendant's row?
No, sir.
At any point in time, did you see, other than the popcorn flick, Mr. Oulson throw anything at the defendant?
I did not.
At any time, did you see Mr. Oulson punch the defendant?
No, sir.
At any time, did you see Mr. Oulson in a position where he's leaning over the chair as if to punch the defendant?
No, sir.
At any time, did you hear the defendant exclaiming or yelling anything that would give you the impression he was being attacked?
I did not.
Okay. Did you get the impression from anything that the defendant was doing, physically or saying, that gave you the impression that he was in a life or death struggle?
No, sir.
So you're telling this jury the only thing you saw was Mr. Oulson flick popcorn?
Yes, that's correct.
At any time, did you see the defendant grab his head as if he was injured or hurt in any manner?
No, sir, I didn't.
And that would be before the popcorn?
Correct. No, I didn't see anything. of
And
that
at any
nature.
time, did you see him act as though he had been injured?
No, sir.
Did you ever hear Mr. Oulson threatening the defendant?
I did not.
Did you ever see Mrs. Oulson standing in front of Chad Oulson trying to hold him back as if this raging guy was trying to get into the defendant's row?
No, sir.
After the shot, did you hear the defendant say anything?
Yes.
Okay, and what was it that you heard the defendant say?
Throw popcorn in my face.
After the shooting, did you see what the defendant did with the firearm?
He brought it back and appeared to lay it in his lap.
Okay. Did someone come up to him at some point in time and take the firearm from him?
Yes.
After Mr. Oulson was shot, did you see what happened to him?
He said, "I can't believe this," and he turned toward his row and took a step or step and a half and collapsed.
Okay. At some point in time, did you see Mrs. Oulson?
Yes.
Okay. And what was she doing when you saw her?
Well, she was hysterical, of course, and had began running up and down the aisle to where I was at. And my wife was behind me. She had been shot in the finger, and we tried to help her with that. We had some napkins and wrapped her finger up. And
Okay, so when you saw Mrs. Oulson, you saw her finger?
Yes.
And what did it look like?
It looked like it was hanging on by the skin.
So you helped her at that point?
Tried to, yes.
All right. At some point in time, did deputies from the sheriff's office come to the theater?
Yes.
All right. Did you stay in the theater the entire time, meaning from the time of the shooting until the time deputies came into the theater, or did you do something else?
Well, I had, in an effort to help Mrs. Oulson, I had asked her if there was someone that I could call, and trying to catch up with her, we wound up down at the exit by the screen and stepped outside, and I asked her if I could call someone to help her, if she wanted to check on her children or whatever, and she said yes and gave me her cell phone and told me who to call.
Okay. Did deputies eventually get to the theater?
Yes.
All right. At some point in time, were you given a form sometimes referred to as a written statement to fill out?
Yes. Well, actually, I had to go find it, but there was a gentleman in the room that people kind of to get the form. It was pretty organized.
How little, anything like that?
No, sir.
All right, so you just put in there the details you thought would be important?
Yes.
All right. Did you assume at some point you'd be interviewed by someone in law enforcement?
Yes,
Were you in fact interviewed by someone in law enforcement?
I was.
At any point in time, did you discuss all the details of what you saw with people that were in the theater that you did not know?
No.
Everything you're testifying to, is that what you personally heard
That's correct.
and personally what you observed?
Yes, sir.
May I have a moment, Your Honor?
You may. Lunch now, and we'll take an hour for lunch. I'll ask you to be back at about 1:45, and we'll resume at that point. All right? Remember my instructions during the recess. Thank you. We'll be in recess as well for an hour. We'll see you back at 1:45. Oh, yeah, thanks. Thank you, Mr. Michaels. And for the record, we do have present and has been present the entire day is Mr. Scott Rosenwasser for the state, Mr. Manning Garcia for the state, Mr. Glenn Martin for the state, Mr. Richard Escobar for defense, Mr. Dino Michaels for defense, Mr. Reeves has been present the entire time, and Mr. Matt Funderburg and Ms. Lopez as well. Flores, I'm sorry. All right. Yeah, I know she's back there somewhere. And Mr. Turner, you can take a lunch as well. Just be back at about 1:45, okay? Thank you.